Let's get into some of the politics now. Stephen James is the Conservative chairman of the Folkestone and Hythe Association. Stephen, thank you for being here. Now, it's the timing, of course, comes after a week in which the Prime Minister made several announcements which he hoped would show that he was taking action on, I quote, stopping the boats. I mean, does this show that he's failing?
Um, Firstly, good morning.
Morning.
I think it's what's happened these last few days has been absolutely awful. And
Yeah.
as a veteran myself who served in Afghanistan, hearing that they're Afghans, and they could potentially be people who serve with us and served our country indirectly. It is awful, and I often think kind of the human element gets kind of lost in this kind of tough man language
Mm.
that's often kind of bandied about in politics, and we really need to just, I think, calm the rhetoric down a little bit, because actually, we touch on, you brought up just a moment ago the fact that these people are leaving a safe country, they're risking their lives, leaving France to come here, and I just think, the politics of it all is all getting caught up in, I know, she said, he said, they said. It needs to calm down, and it needs to just look at the issues in front of us, which is why do people want to come here? How are they getting here? This idea of making it a kind of a place they wouldn't want to come, with these kind of barges and sending to Rwanda. I mean, do those people actually know in the camps as they're traveling through those many countries in Europe that when they get here, they could possibly be sent to Rwanda, they could possibly be sent back to their country of origin? So in terms of the messaging, yes, it's great, but I'm sure they're not listening to to BBC Radio Kent to find out that that's going to
No,
happen.
no.
So it's that's kind of my kind of, that's probably more
Yeah,
personal view on it,
I can understand that. Do you think then the government is getting it wrong? I mean, they have been accused, haven't they? I think it was in the Mirror over the weekend of gimmicky policies.
um I think the phrase "stop the small boats" is unhelpful. Yes, it's a simple phrase. It's easy for everyone to remember and rattle off. But you're not going to stop all boats or stop all small boats. I mean, it's hard. You know, we've had people landing on our shores since 55 BC, when Julius Caesar landed, here in our county. It's going to be very, very difficult to stop all small boats. But what we can do is, dismantle these criminal networks, which are ultimately, abusing these people, taking their money, taking everything that belongs to them, to put them on a dangerous boat to travel across our channel. It's I find, the argument always comes to, what's the government doing? What's the government doing? Well, actually, France, what are France doing? How are
We'll
they
we'll
helping
talk
this
to, we'll
situation? They're
talk
letting
to
people leave their shores in dangerous
they're
boats.
stopping quite a lot of them, to be fair, and we will get the French view later on. But back to Rishi Sunak, I'm wondering whether you think he's got his priorities in the right order. Then, if he's talking about Rwanda and if he's talking about Ascension Island, although of course I think that idea has gone away now.
Um, I mean, it's easy for us to all be kind of armchair politicians, and say what we would do if we were in charge. Ultimately, I think what Rishi's doing is he's putting the structures and the systems in place to, to make it work. But it's not going to happen overnight, and tragedies, sadly, like this are still going to happen. And I just think, yes, we've got to give this some time to kind of to settle in and start working. But at the same time, we do need to see action, and we need to see a reduction in the numbers of illegal immigrants coming across. And just to make it kind of very clear, we're talking about illegal immigrants here. We're not talking about refugees, because I think Britain has got a very, very proud history of welcoming people who are
But
refugees
these
from all
people,
around the world.
we started this conversation by acknowledging these people were from Afghanistan, so presumably they would have a very legitimate claim to asylum here in this country.
It's hard to say without knowing their individual,
I
circumstances.
grant you that.
But it's, I think they have to go through the proper routes. They really do, because by giving money to these criminal gangs, they're putting more and more people
So
in
how do
danger.
we
Because
make
now,
that happen then? How do we make sure? Is it about more safe and legal routes then?
yes, but it's also about, much better and closer working with our allies around the world. Not just in the EU, making sure that, at the kind of point of entry, into their journey towards us, they know that when they get here, they are not going to be they're not going to be entitled to claim asylum because they're entering as illegal immigrants.
Even if they have a strong case because they're from Afghanistan?
Well, ultimately, they've broken the law, haven't they? If they've got a strong case, then they can go through a safe and legal route, which, linked to having more of them, I think is the right way to go.
If they don't know that, if they unwittingly do it, it's still the same?
Absolutely, because there has to be a line. You have to draw a line. You can't have some rules for some people and some rules for other people. I think we need to have safe and legal routes. We've got a proud history of welcoming people here. We just need to make sure that those people are channeled through those safe and legal routes. Now, if that means dismantling these criminal gangs and absolutely, demolishing their supply networks and making sure that, they are unable to, take advantage of these poor people, then so be it. But we also need to realize that, we are not the only country in the world dealing with this issue.
Stephen, we'll have to leave it there for time reasons only. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. That's Stephen James, Conservative Chairman of the Folkestone and Hythe Association. Listening to that is Mike Tapp, who is the Labour parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal. Mike, thank you for being here as well. Shall we pick up on the point that Stephen was making? He was saying we need a line. So we need a law which says if you come here via a small boat, i.e. illegally, then you will not be allowed in. What's Labour's position on that?
Well, firstly, we need a government that's serious about getting on top of this issue and doesn't continuously introduce gimmick policies which are aimed really at tricking the public into thinking that they're doing something about this. And they're good at doing that because they've brought in Rwanda that doesn't work, which has been on the front pages of the newspapers for months. The same with the barges. But actually, Labour will take this seriously.
But that's not answering my question. To be fair, I wanted to know what about Stephen's point then? He was saying, so obviously the law has changed. If you come here on a small boat, it is illegal. Would Labour keep that enshrined in law?
So what we'll do is we'll speed up the processing of those that arrive. So when Labour
you wouldn't keep that then?
Well, we'd speed up the processing of those that arrive. So when we left office in 2011, it was about 18,000 in the backlog. Now we're up to 172,000. And the answer to this is to clear that backlog. And we need to do that with more decision makers.
But would it be illegal for somebody to come here on a small boat?
Well, if you let me finish answering the question, please, Anna. So what that would do by speeding up the processing was mean that those who should be here and are entitled to asylum get it. And those that don't have that entitlement are removed. At the moment, because the backlog is so large and there's no processing, that's simply not happening. So people aren't being deported that should be, and people that need help aren't receiving it. And we see this then having a massive knock-on effect to cost. And it's a very costly experiment that the Conservatives are running here. £6 million a day on hotels. We've actually got 50,000 units of property that the government can use. And if we go back to when Labour were last in office, at just 18,000 in the backlog, we wouldn't need these silly gimmicks like the barges and Rwanda.
With respect, I'm not sure my question's been answered. I think my listeners would genuinely be interested to know what Labour would do. So under Conservative policy, they've changed the law to make it illegal to enter the country via these routes. And I'm just wondering if Labour would keep that so that or would you change the law? Would you change that bill back again?
But we'd have to see what's necessary. So Labour would speed up the processing so those that shouldn't be here are removed and those that need help receive it. But we'd also make sure that those safe and legal routes are viable and workable.
When you say see what's necessary, what does that actually mean? Sorry to labour this one, but I just really want to know.
No, I think it's distracting from the main point here that the whole of the immigration system is broken with no integrity at all. And actually, the 5-point plan that Labour has will restore the integrity in the system so that it actually works, so that we do deport those that shouldn't be here and help those that do. And we wouldn't need the silly gimmicks that...
Okay, so 5 points. You've mentioned speeding up the processing. We're really short on time. If you could just rattle through the others, that would be really instructive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a massive part of this is getting on top of the criminal gangs. The Conservatives have failed on that. So we'd introduce a new cross-border policing unit with the National Crime Agency. Now, that would work upstream. By the way, I've worked for the National Crime Agency in the past, so I understand what's needed here. And that will have a massive impact on taking on the smuggling gangs. Of course, we'll speed up the processing, which I've already talked about. We'll reform the resettlement routes, and that will mean that essentially those with family connections here and who are looking at using the safe and legal routes actually can, whereas at the moment we're seeing that's failing. For example, the Afghans who have unfortunately tried to cross over the last week. A massive part of the failure here is there's no returns agreement with France. So we'd negotiate that. Unfortunately, what we see at the moment is too many Conservative politicians, Natalie Elphick's a prime example of this in Dover, of attacking the French. So there's no diplomacy there. So we'll have adult diplomatic diplomacy to ensure.
To be fair,
that
she says we need to work with the French. That's what she says. You
don't just say that.
Joint patrols, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she says that and then she attacks them in Parliament consistently and in the press. If you attack our closest neighbours, they're less likely to work with us, aren't they? And then, of course, the last point in the 5-point plan is we'll look to tackle the humanitarian crisis at source. So we'll bring that spending on humanitarian relief back up to 0.7% in commitment, so that we're trying to get on top of the situation like many other nations are, but we're failing to do.
That is all we've got time for. Thank you for getting through those 5 points. I'm sure my listeners will react to those. Mike, stay listening. That's Mike Tapp then, the Labour parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal.